It's a real pleasure to talk to you about the work that we're doing. I'm sort of a fallen theoretical physicist. Natalie's a very hard act to follow. I'm going to be describing a field that's considerably earlier in its evolution. And this is the applications of machine learning to the study of climate. So let's see if my slides visible. Here we go. Yes, they are. This work would really not have been possible without a very close partnership with a number of colleagues at NERSC, and of course the facilities at NERSC, as well as the fact that Berkeley Lab has enjoyed since its inception over 94 years ago a very close partnership with University of California, Berkeley, which manages Berkeley Lab, and my grad student, Malcolm Mahesh, is really the engine behind this work. And the other interesting aspect of this research is that we're now seeing the potential for public-private partnerships, in this case with NVIDIA, dramatically accelerate our scientific work. And NVIDIA is sort of a key partner throughout this entire research effort, the effort that I'll describe toward the end of my talk. And the reason why I'm framing this past as prologue is that much of the work that we're going to be doing is sort of seeing if we can train emulators against the climate of the past to understand what's coming at us thanks to global environmental change. And let's see if, there's a clicker. Let's see if I can move that. Yes. So machine learning has been used in environmental science in a variety of forms. Machine learning really can be thought of as really grown up in perhaps non-parametric forms of statistics, but it's been applied for many years, but its exponential growth began really in the mid-2000s. In fact, if you look at the evolution of literature, this is from the Web of Science, where one simply asks for all articles concerning machine learning or artificial intelligence, but also concern the topics of weather and climate. You can see that the field was producing maybe less than 100 articles up until roughly a decade ago, and now has exploded to approximately 5,000 articles per year. The data for 2014 is incomplete, so that rollover and the downward trend in 2014 is simply an artifact of the fact that I took the measurement of this data approximately 2 weeks ago. But we're in a rapidly rising trend of the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence, weather and climate. And I hope to make a case to you that this is going to revolutionize our ability to study climate change. I'm going to sort of bookend this talk with work that we did with colleagues at NERSC. This is Prabhat and his team in the data sciences group roughly 8 years ago. So that's the first bookend. And the second bookend is the work that we've been conducting with Shashank Subramanian and Peter Harrington at NERSC in the last year. So let's start with the bookend from 8 years ago. So we started thinking through how could we use NERSC's computing power to solve a needle in the haystack problem. And that needle in the haystack problem is that we're interested in looking at climate extremes. Extremes are inherently rare. They tend to be highly nonlinear phenomena that are highly localized. They're short-lived, things like rainstorms, severe rainstorms, downpours, and so forth. And so if you're looking at decades worth of climate data, it's a needle in the haystack problem. And we partnered with NERSC to begin thinking through how to solve that challenge. And at this time, we were really focused primarily on analyzing the output from traditional climate models. So we were interested in sort of a categorization problem, and most of that research was focused around using the tools at that time, which were regarded as sort of cutting edge, which were convolutional neural networks. And we were interested in classifying the output of climate models to using essentially algorithms that were being adopted largely from commercial applications and from machine vision applications, to understand whether we could adapt those techniques to look for extremes in climate data. And so the phenomena of interest, I don't have to remind you, we've seen a couple of particularly severe hurricanes and tropical cyclones interact with the eastern seaboard during this particular hurricane season. And there's a picture in the upper left in this slide. The other systems of interest are atmospheric rivers, which are shown in the lower left-hand part of this slide, which are responsible for bringing about 30% of the potable water to the American West. So the snowpack in the American West is the storage mechanism for that influx of water being brought in from atmospheric rivers during the winter season. And then, of course, also the major frontal systems, which are shown on the right in this slide, which provide much of the rainfall to the central and eastern part of the United States, in the form of mesoscale convective complexes and other weather systems, all of which constitute extreme weather. So, as I mentioned, we were borrowing techniques from machine learning being applied to the commercial sector and to image recognition. And the starts, of course, we wouldn't have a talk that's complete without looking at baby animals. So some of this early work was interested in taking images and understanding whether or not you could locate a cute baby animal in that picture, assumed like a cat. And then once you grouped that cute baby animal with other baby animals, which may or may not be friendly, so in this case, a puppy and a duck, could one also segregate the image into those separate young animals. And then if you could do that, even better, isolate those instances, those particular animal species within the image itself. I had the interesting experiment of running this experiment on my grad student, who was challenged to recognize the distinction between certain different kinds of animals. I'll come back to that perhaps a little bit later. So what we went on to do as part of this research was then to map that image class localization, object detection, in image segmentation onto, for example, tropical cyclones, as shown in the lower left-hand side of this slide, and then go on to both identify tropical cyclones along with atmospheric rivers, as shown in the second from right-hand image on this slide. And then the final application, and the one that ended up winning the Gordon Bell Prize, as I'll come back to a little bit later, is one where we were able to not only isolate these phenomena, but track them as they evolved in time and in the output from a climate model, and do so at exceptionally high speed. So, yeah, this clicker is this clicker is not particularly caffeinated. So what we were doing is running a supervised phenomenological classification between three extreme phenomena that are particularly of interest: tropical cyclones, atmospheric rivers, and weather fronts, the three phenomena that I showed you in the real world. And the problem that we faced back then, this is before unsupervised learning, so we were very obsessed at this time, 8 years ago, with labeling data sets. And we've moved on from that. But for those of you who remember, the issue of whether or not we could run unsupervised or semi-supervised learning, so whether or not we did not have labeled data or were able to generate labels on the fly or actually had labels, this was a major go, no-go issue 8 years ago. And it's very much now in our rearview mirror. But at the time, we were fortunate to have enough grad students and colleagues were willing to sit down and label data that we had labeled data sets. And so we were able to construct, yes, no tests on images, and then go on to begin to perform image classification on that data. So the input into the test that we ran was output from CAM, which stands for the Community Atmosphere Model. This is a climate model that's entirely in the public domain. You can download it right now from the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where I used to work. It'll even, I believe, it might compile on a Mac, although it'll certainly give a Mac a run for its money. This is a model that's been designed and heavily used for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And before I had the honor of serving as the first chief scientist for DOE's own climate modeling effort, the Energy Exoskeleton System model. This was the model that was being run at NERSC, and actually was the basis for another Nobel Prize we'll come back to at the very end of my talk. So we were using PAM at that time and labeling its output as shown in the upper image in this picture, which is the blue outlines show you where atmospheric rivers are propagating from west to east in both the northern and southern hemispheres. And we had ground truth that we could then use to train a machine learning algorithm. And the input into this image segregation or this image segmentation problem is wherever huge amounts of water were being transported by transient eddies in the Earth's atmosphere. And the challenge for us at that time was that these events were highly irregular, they changed shape with time, they propagated within the background. There were a lot of things that were challenging about this as a sort of an image or image segregation and phenomenological tracking phenomenon problem. Well, we were able to construct an algorithm and test it at Corey. And the work that we did at Corey wound up being the basis for work that we then took to the Summit supercomputer that's still running at the Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility. So at the time that we took this problem, tested it on Corey at NERSC, and then propagated it to Summit. Summit was the #1 system in the public domain on Earth. And it had the distinction of being able to run it slightly over an exaflop at 16-bit floating point arithmetic. So it was an exceptionally fast machine. And we were able to show that ground truth, which is the hand-drawn labels that are made by a lot of dedicated grad students and colleagues on the right, could be mimicked by machine learning as shown, algorithm as shown on the left. And the other key distinction of this research was that this was a highly performant image segmentation code. So this image segmentation code was actually the world's first true exascale parameter recognition. And by exascale, I mean exa-op, not exaflop. It was running, again, at reduced precision arithmetic. But the fact that it was able to exceed an exa-op meant that it also got the Gordon Bell Prize, one of the Gordon Bell Prizes in 2018. And this is a team assembled both from colleagues from NERSC and Prabhat is the relatively young man, the second from right in the background, along with colleagues from Oak Ridge. I'm very pleased to have been able to attain this world-leading climate application. And this is sort of where we sort of parked our work using image segmentation. We could see the future. We were working on, we dumped a bunch of data onto NERSC that allowed us to continue to classify images. But I want to switch now to the other bookend, which is the work that we're currently doing with NERSC and with NVIDIA. And so this is work where I was stimulated by an Aspen Global Change Institute that I ran with Veronica Eyring. Veronica was the person who led the coupled model intercomparison project, the last IPCC project. For those of you who have not been to the Aspen Global Change Institute, it's a very pleasant experience. We hold them in the summer, out in tent. We're sort of subject to the vagaries of extreme weather, which passes over Aspen, including severe thunderstorms. But the key feature of this meeting was that I was forced into close proximity with a number of colleagues from NVIDIA. And those colleagues convinced me that the future for studying climate change was with abandoning traditional climate models, which are based on solving the Euler equations for fluid flow, and moving entirely to data-driven weather prediction. And the reason is that you can train these algorithms on the past, with data that extends back to 1979, the start of this record. And what was amazing to me is that these models could be supported by small teams. So NVIDIA is fortunate to have the resources to stand up a climate team within the company. That team is about 15 people strong. And in 2 years, they have been able to emulate what typically takes about a person millennium worth of effort at a traditional climate modeling center. So they've now created a fully performant weather emulator that works as well as the world's best current numerical weather prediction. And we know that because we've shown that, and it's in papers that we have currently sitting at archive under peer review. So this is a remarkable achievement. And the point I'm trying to get across to you is that machine learning is now accelerating progress by orders of magnitude in a way that I've never seen in my career. Let me show you an example of. So remember, I mentioned to you that we were doing image segmentation back in 2018, sort of parked that problem. And this is when I became aware that numerical simulation using emulators was becoming a thing. So this shows you the evolution of those emulators over roughly a 4 to 5 year time span. In that time span, emulators are outpacing numerical weather prediction models by a factor of 30 in terms of the rate at which they're gaining resolution. In fact, they've achieved their goal of basically now being rate limited by how quickly numerical weather prediction in itself gain resolution in order to train them. Now, the field has put up so rapidly that the gaining activity now, the rate limiting step, is numerical weather prediction again, and not the speed of the emulators. But anyway, that's a nice problem to have. So what are we using these emulators on? We're using them again on climate extremes, and I'm showing you on the right-hand side that these climate extremes are now creating dozens of incidents every year that exceed $1 billion for the US alone. They've caused over $100 billion worth of flood damage. And they're again posing this challenge of how do we detect them? They're low likelihood by definition, so you can't really rely on the observational record. So one other possibility is instead to ask, could we, rather than relying on a traditional numerical weather prediction model, which consumes an enormous amount of compute resources to emulate these things, could we instead simulate them in silicon using a climate emulator? And the answer to that question is yes. So we've generated what we call a huge ensemble of reproductions of the summer of 2023 using NVIDIA's climate emulator. And the reason why I call it a huge ensemble is that in order to get out several sigma away from the mode, we need at least 10,000 samples. We were the world's first climate emulation effort to attain a 10,000 member ensemble. And the other thing we've been able to do is to show that these, let me click through all this stuff. The other thing we're able to show is that this emulator, they said this thing is really, it's the opposite of caffeinated. These emulators basically reproduce all the tests that numerical weather prediction centers subject their own world-leading models to. So this model meets the strictest standards we can subject it to tests that were identified by the numerical weather prediction centers themselves. 2023 was the hottest summer record until 2024. It still holds the record for having the hottest September and October ever experienced that we can see for the last 2,000 years. The graph in the upper right shows you the size of ensembles that have been generated. The graph on the left is by traditional climate models. The graph on the right is from climate emulators. The red circle is us. And this is thanks to the exceptional performance being generated and attainable from the Perlmutter supercomputer. So again, in this case, the fact that we had access to Perlmutter was really the enabling, and the superb human talent that comes along with the supercomputer center like NERSC is really, the machines and the people were made this attainment of that red circle possible. So I want to tell you a little bit more about why the using emulators was so critical for good of reasons. So I'm going to click through this stuff again. Okay. Come on. Yeah, I'll keep doing this stuff. So SFNO stands for the spherical Fourier neural operator. This is NVIDIA's emulator. It uses the highest resolution data to train it. It's somewhere between 10,000 to 100,000 times faster than numerical weather prediction. It's a lot greener than numerical weather prediction. It produces the same amount of simulation with 1/10,000th amount of power. It's available at a couple of facilities, both NERSC and the Polaris supercomputer at the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. And because it can be trained really quickly, it's very popular in academia. And we've now dumped our work into NVIDIA's own GitHub repository under an open source license. And it's being picked up by the University of Chicago and a number of colleagues working. Great. So let me describe to you what this looks like in terms of a supercomputing problem. So every day we're producing 7,500 hindcasts for 15 days. So we're simulating, we start on June 1st of 2023. We put up 7,500 numbers, which gets us like 4 sigma away from the mode, run those for 15 days, terminate them, start another simulation for June 2nd, run that for 15 days, etc. The thing that we had not realized kind of right out of the gate is that this was going to be a data movement problem rather than a compute problem. So we occupied Perlmutter, 64 minutes on it for 3.5 days straight. The thing that was challenging here is not the computer and actually the compute. It was the fact that data was coming off the back plane of Perlmutter at 600 gigabits per second, which is much faster than we can write to disk. So we wrote this to scratch, threw away 90% of it, and then stored it to disk. But already you can see the problem here. We have to abandon the way that the COM community has been obsessed with saving every bit from simulation. We have to abandon this and now emulate what our physics colleagues do and only save a tiny fraction of the data and see if it's interesting. In the interest of time, I'm going to click through all this stuff, but give the headline messages. This ensemble dramatically reduces uncertainties compared to traditional weather prediction. It allows us to get a factor 2 greater than sigma away from the tail. So going from 2 to 4 sigma may certainly not sound like much, but that's 2 orders of magnitude larger in sample. And in principle, we can get out to 5 sigma. So if I really want to scratch my physicist envy itch and get out to 5 sigma, which is the gold standard of the physics community, we could do it with a Euro calculation. And the other thing that I think is particularly interesting, and I won't have time to cover this, is that we picked up events which numerical prediction centers missed with the same lead time. So we were able to go back and look at, because the numerical prediction centers went back and said, clean up after themselves, and they reproduced 2023, they missed a number of low likely extreme events. We picked those up. And we've already advertised this to two of the world's numerical weather prediction centers. This is one of those events. This is the Pacific Northwest heat wave. This event, in a way that I won't go because I want to take questions, this event was missed by the European Center when it first did its hindcasts for that time, forecast for that time period. We were able to successfully checked it. And we think this is an important message to numerical weather prediction centers worldwide. And also anybody who's trying to do disaster preparedness. Okay, so where do we go from here? We're looking at the phenomena in these hindcasts. One of the things we're asking is, do tropical cyclones act, do these things act like the particles in normal diffusive flow? Do they obey random walks or something quite different from random walks? We already have evidence that's been unobtainable otherwise. They do not obey classical random walks. I think about Einstein level applies at the beginning of the 20th century. So that's interesting. And we're looking at several other phenomena in these flows. The next thing we're doing is moving on to what is regarded as the grand challenge problem, which is, can we look at climate change? And the answer is, I'm happy to say yes. People say this is impossible. I can guarantee you, if you borrow from the physics community, you can show that this work is entirely possible. We're working on looking at fast feedbacks right this minute. And I think we'll have results on this early next year. This is a problem that people say currently is impossible with emulators. It is not. And then we're moving to use some techniques from statistical physics to go after sort of the grandest challenge of all, which is, can we use emulators trained on the past to predict future climate change? And I think we have an answer to that problem as well. I think the answer is yes. But that's a claim in mind. So we'll see if we get there. These papers are up on archive. I'll be happy to talk to you about them offline if you wish. Here we go. Thanks to all my collaborators, including, I'm sorry for the lack of diversity in this team. I'm commissioning a World Research Conference next summer, where I can assure you the gender split is 50-50. But if this is a phenomenal team to work with, colleagues from NERSC, from NVIDIA, my grad student colleagues from UC Irvine, couldn't have been possible without this team effort. We have a very bright future in front of us. This is a figure from a paper that Veronica and I have just published in Nature, talking about the future. And the last thing I'll say before closing is that I emphasize kind of the future in this talk in really long, in the very recent past. I was lucky to have been mentored by Warren Washington, who was one of the people who was also a co-recipient because of his work using NERSC to do a lot of climate change projections that went to the fourth IPCC assessment, co-recipient and one of the contributors to the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. Warren was a senior scientist at NCAR when I worked there and had the privilege of being mentored by him. This is probably a memoriam to him because he just passed away a couple of weeks ago. But really was a leading light in climate science. He was actually a recipient of a Presidential Medal of Honor from Obama. And so in his memory, I'd really like to say that we've come an incredibly long way. I've emphasized the recent past, but NERSC has had an exceptionally distinguished history in climate change, in climate science, going back to its dawn, if you go back into the early issues of Buffer. So with that, let me close and take any questions you might have. Thank you. Yes, please, Barbara.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I'm wondering, so if I understand correctly, you eliminate the equations.
That's correct, but we are, that is correct.
And I'm wondering, you learned something about the physics?
One of the things that we are now doing, again, something that people said, what isn't impossible, but it's not, is that you can go back and unscramble. So the emulators are basically handing us the fields that you need to know to solve fluid dynamics, right? So the velocity field, the temperature field, the humidity field, the fields that are governed by the Euler equations. You can go back into an emulator and actually tear that system apart into the adiabatic tendencies that are coming from the equations of motion and the diabatic tendencies that are coming from all the physics things that really get transferred. We're in the process of doing that. So and in so doing, we're going to verify that these equation-driven emulators are in fact correctly emulating the equations of motion. Because once we're done with this, we'll be able to show that the diabatic tendencies are exactly what you would have gotten from the traditional Euler equations of motion. So I think we can prove to ourselves that these emulators actually fit for purpose. And we're in the process of doing that. But I'm with you, Barbara, there's something slightly too automagical about these things. And as a physicist, I'll only believe it. I've really kicked the tires to the point where I've practically flattened them. So we are testing that proposition.
So Bill, with the this being data driven, there's like really high resolution data in areas like Europe, in the US and such, Doppler radar, all that. Yeah. But there's a significant lack of that in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yes.
And so what are you going to do to backfill the missing data for the Southern Hemisphere?
Well, fortunately, NASA, if you look at the European Center for Near Range Forecasting, any modern meteorological center, they assimilate data from slightly under 100 satellites a day. Right? And that fleet is generating slightly under a petabyte of observations per day at a kilometer resolution. And these things are panoptic, right? orbiting, they're polar orbiters, the low Earth orbit things. They're seeing everything. So my suggestion, and the phrase I use now, is let's cut out the middleman. Let's cut out the numerical weather prediction model and directly assimilate the data directly into a common emulator. And people are, and we're now starting to experiment. I'm using the world here, but the community is now starting to experiment with assimilation of raw data. It's near resolution, which is 1 kilometer. And that's for the legacy European Space Agency stuff. Of course, the commercial sector data is down to sub-meter resolution now. But we can assimilate that directly into the data from the model. Why not? And then the distinction between the hemispheres goes away. But I do, your issue about, is one of the point I want to make about data democracy here. And I'm sorry to say this in front of my NERSC colleagues, but much as I love supercomputers, the fact that these emulators will run on a single GPU means that they will run, I don't know how recent vintage this laptop is, but my laptop has 44 GPUs on it. There's no reason why you can't use that as a great democratizer of being able to run emulators worldwide, right? Anybody with access to a Mac with GPU or a modern laptop with GPU should be able to run emulation no matter where they are, South America, Africa, you name it. And so I think I'm hoping that we will see this capability become sort of a great level of a great democratizer of access to timely information that people need in order to make, to safeguard their communities, especially in the face of global climate change. Again, with all, much as I love supercomputers, our laptops are now supercomputers. So, circa 1992. Thank you.